So Jessica J. Ruttenberg is Lieutenant Colonel retired. Here is the Director of Level Up Aviation, and looking forward to her talk on failure to adapt.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna go off script for a second because Meg, I cried more than you did in your opening ceremony. I felt so alone in my career, being the only woman, having 3 babies, and I flew with all 3 of my children in 2 different weapon systems when they told me I couldn't. And I flew with breast pumps and explained to my crew how they worked, and continued to fly in the seat with breast pumps and express milk. And I know women did it before me, but that was before we had the explosion of the internet and Facebook where we could connect with each other. So I see hope, I see progress, and I'm really happy to be here. And I've never cried on stage before, but here we are. So I talk about a lot of things, pregnancy, aviation. Today I'm going to talk about airplanes in China. So who here remembers what they wanted to be when they grew up? When you were a kid, what did you want to be? Did you want to be like a WWF wrestler, maybe a chef, NASCAR driver? Do you guys remember? I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. When I was 6 years old, my parents moved me to Pensacola, Florida. And if you guys have ever been to Pensacola, Florida, anybody? Right, you know, white sandy beaches, crystal clear water, it's beautiful. But it's also the home of the Blue Angels, the Naval Air Station Flight Demonstration Team. So if you don't know who these are, it's a bunch of fighter pilots flying really close formation, doing some really awesome tricks, and they go from air show to air show around the country to demonstrate, you know, their aircraft's capability. So I got to see that a lot as a little girl at the beach because they practiced all the time. But it wasn't a possibility for me in my mind yet because it was the 1980s. Does anybody here know why it's significant, the 1980s? My kids call it the olden days, but because women couldn't fly fighter pilots when I grew up. They couldn't fly until 1993. So I'm watching them and I'm totally enamored with what they're doing. And it wasn't until many, many years later when I had one of those career days for women. This is why it's so important that we see representation, especially in our youth. And I saw my first female pilot. I don't remember her name. I don't remember what she flew. I don't even remember what she said, just like you might forget what I say. But I saw someone in a flight suit that looked like me, and all of a sudden I was like, I didn't know we could do that. That's what I want to do. I want to be an Air Force pilot. So I went on to high school, college, ROTC. I tried to join the Air Force as an Air Force pilot, but unfortunately my eyes didn't make the flight physical for depth perception. I was very disappointed, but I was also very patriotic, and the Air Force promised a lot of adventure. So I commissioned as a comm officer, which is called Cyber now. We talked a little bit about that. And then 9/11 happened, and everything changed. I deployed, I came back, but I never forgot my dream to be a pilot. And I started working with the optometrist on base to try to find a way forward to path the wings. And eventually I was able to pass the depth perception test, pass my flight physical, and just before I was too old to fly, cross-trained to be an Air Force pilot. So I got accepted. I drive from BLS First Base, California to Columbus, Mississippi to start pilot training. First day of class, all male class, shocker. And we stand up, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm from here, I want to be a fighter pilot, they're awesome, blah, 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 right? But before we get to the end of the class, the door opens up, and I am removed from my all-male class, where I'm taken to the flight commander's office, and I'm told I have failed my flight physical. And I'm like, nah, no, I think it's worked out. You have an old physical. They're like, no, the physical you took last week, you are too short to fly. You see, when I had my flight physical, the person measuring me was not so nice and pushed down on my head and had a more accurate assessment that I was 5'3", 3.5 inches. You have to be 5'4" to fly an Air Force aircraft. So I failed my flight physical and I was removed from pilot training. But I'm also very persistent, or my husband would say stubborn. And I refused to quit at this point. So I drove around the country to different bases with different aircraft and got measured in each one of them until I could find an aircraft that I was safe enough to fly. And they allowed me to fly the KC-135. So I went back to pilot training and happily ever after. So why am I telling you this story? I'm gonna put these back on. I went on 20 years, Lieutenant Colonel in the Pentagon, got to change a lot of Air Force policies. But what happened to me is still happening today. The standing height of 64 inches to be an Air Force pilot, I know there's a waiver, but it's a workaround, a stopgap solution, eliminates 44% of the female population of the United States. So 44%, gone, can't fly. But you don't just get measured for your standing height. If you haven't figured it out yet, pilots sit in the cockpit. They don't stand in the cockpit. So you get measured from your hip to your eyesight, right? You're looking out. Well, when we created that standard height and sitting height, it was based on a 1967 anthropometric survey that they were still using. They tried to update it in 2011, but still had lack of volunteers and had lack of representation of women and minorities. So we were using one type of person to base our engineering design on for human systems. Now, because of that, the sitting height eliminates 74% of black women. Why do you think we have less than 1% black women flying? A percent of a percent might have to be a height standard, is the beginning of my guess. Although there are many other factors. It eliminates 72% of Hispanic women and 61% of Asian women from flying, just based on sitting height. Now, how can you do this? I'm going to explain this. Bear with me. If I'm 5'4", and this person's 5'4", they're both qualified for standing height. But Caucasian body types, on average, have longer torsos and shorter legs. African Americans have shorter torsos and longer legs at the same height. And that is why we have eliminated so many minorities and minority women from flying. So the F-15, only 8.9% of women can fly it based on their reach. The B-52, only 14% women can fly it. But these are older aircraft, and it makes sense that we had a standard prior to 1993 when women could fly. But the aircraft that we're going to be flying in the future, that we have today, the C-17 that will be flying until 2050, eliminates 1 out of 3 women for sitting height compared to 1% of men. Yet we have done nothing to fix the engineering around a seat. So I get really fired up at this point. Okay, so we talk about, we're all on the same page here, right? But how do we convince senior leaders to change policy and to fund it more than whatever we were talking about, Viagra? So the wars that I flew in, Iraq, Afghanistan, it was based on a national defense strategy based on terrorism. But that's changed. In 2018, the national defense strategy shifted from terrorism to a great power competition with Russia and China. No longer is the United States uncontested in all its domains: air, land, sea, cyber, and space. Can't forget the Space Force. Do we have anybody in the Space Force here? 1, okay. And China has 3 to 4 times, depending on which statistic, even with their one-child policy, the population of the United States on to 2040. Let's see the 5 minutes. And they're going to have 15 times the STEM graduates based on their new educational reforms. And their GDP is going to pass us. So in 2040, It is projected China will have almost 4 times our population. They'll have more money than us, and they're going to be more educated. While at the same time, the DoD released a report saying that 71% of the American population is not eligible to serve for many reasons, medical, legal, yada, yada, yada. Why would we impose these barriers that limit large portions of a recruiting population? I'm going to give you one example, and then I'm going to kind of wrap it up because I could talk about this for an hour. I've written some papers on it if you're interested in reading a long paper about anthropometric design. It's called Invisible Women. The cryptolinguists of the flying community, these are the flying linguists that go in the back of the aircraft, right? Their only job is to egress the aircraft and to sit in the seat as any passenger would. Yet they're still held to the same standards as the pilots in the front. Why do they have to be 5'4"? Why? Because that's the way it's always been. We need to adapt to the current recruiting population in our engineering and anthropometric designs, not just we'll make an exception or a policy around it to work around. Start from the beginning, 95% percentile, and that's going to include all the demographics of the United States so we don't eliminate anyone. Well, these linguists in the back of the plane have a really high aptitude test called the DLAP. It's very difficult to learn different languages, especially as an American. And because of that, they couldn't get enough qualified candidates in the back of the plane that could speak stuff like Chinese Mandarin. And because of that, they had to lower the academic standard to get enough recruits to come in. What do you think happened? They had a 70% washout rate at $125,000 a pop per person. So they got more men in. You know who can really speak Chinese Mandarin? Short Asian women. Now, that policy's been fixed now. I know they no longer have the washout rate. Once we brought it to their attention in 2022. But that's one example of how it's not a woke generation. It's a national defense strategy situation. And if you take anything away from this besides I'm short, just know inclusiveness equals competitiveness. Thank you.